Hello. Today I'm going to be reviewing the third and final season of Narcos Mexico. So, to those of you who've already seen some of my previous reviews for Narcos Mexico or just regular Narcos, a lot of my thoughts I shared in those reviews still apply to this season. As a whole, this show is very consistent in its quality, which is good for the show. Following the events of the first two seasons of Narcos Mexico, Miguel Felix Gallardo was arrested, and all of the members of his big cartel sort of went their own way, which gives us the setup for this season. We have all the different cartels starting to run their own operations without oversight, and with a few of them there's some conflicts going on. Now, in the absence of Miguel, we have a new character who rises to take the top spot of main antagonist, and that's Amado Carrillo Fuentes. He runs the Juarez cartel, and he's sort of one of the main characters of the show. We follow him a lot, similar to how Miguel was followed in the previous two seasons. However, Amado is a much more compelling and interesting character to watch. He's also a little bit easier to root for. Obviously, he's a very bad person and stuff, but as a character, he is compelling and you can sort of partially root for him a bit. Whereas Miguel was always a bit too up his own ass for you to really root for him. But I mean, as a whole, a lot of the stuff in this season is fairly similar to the stuff that came before it. You have the good guys working to try and stop the cartel people. We have Walt Breslin, who returns from the previous season and is the main American character in the show. He sort of works to try and take down the cartel leaders, but he sort of gets hindered by bureaucracy and all that. I mentioned there was conflict between some of the cartels. There's actually sort of like a gang war that takes place between the Tijuana and Sinaloa cartels, which is something that has been built up towards throughout the entirety of the series. These two cartels have always sort of hated each other and there's always been conflict. But in the previous two seasons, with them both being under Miguel, they sort of were forced to put their differences aside a bit, although they still conflicted quite a bit. Without that oversight, they end up devolving into open war. There's also a couple new characters that get a bit of a focus in this season. First of all, there's this journalist, Andrea, who sort of investigates the connection between this political leader and the cartels. And then her story also sort of ties into Walt Breslin's story later on as well. I'd say she probably does more investigating and stuff than the cops in the show, to be honest. And then there's this other character that we're introduced to, a police officer named Victor. Now, his story is the most disconnected from everything else, and I think it's one of the best additions in the season, really. At the start of the series, he's asked to find a missing girl, and he reluctantly decides that he'll, take a look and see if he can find anything. And he ends up finding out about all these girls who are turning up dead, and he does some investigating and figure out that they all are working at this factory or whatever. Anyway, he eventually manages to figure out that someone is picking the girls up when they're walking home and then killing them or whatever. He heads out there to try and catch him in the act, and manages to pull him over one day. And then after a brief conversation, he ends up killing the man responsible for these deaths. However, the next day, he gets called in by the police to come look at a crime scene, and they go to this place and find heaps of dead women. And it's revealed that this one guy that the police caught and killed was only one of many people responsible for doing this. That it's sort of like an epidemic or whatever. All these sick men murdering women or whatever. And it's a really powerful way to end the whole arc. then the series goes on to tell us that it's actually still going on, apparently. So yeah, I think that was a very powerful way to end that arc. All this effort throughout the entire season for him to finally catch and kill one of the murderers, only to find out he's only one out of, however many. As for the ending of the show as a whole, the ending was sort of unsatisfying in one way. It didn't really have a conclusive ending that sort of wraps everything up. But given the fact that it's inspired by true events, this makes sense because I guess the whole Mexican drug war doesn't really have a conclusion as of yet. And it probably never will, if we're being honest. So it sort of works. That's not to say that the ending was just sort of out of nowhere. The ending does sort of conclude the whole thing with Amado. If they wanted to make like another season, I think they probably could have. With Amado out of the picture, they sort of set up Chapo as the next big thing. He gets arrested towards the end of the series, but he's still sort of like running his cartel in prison with his new partner Mayo, and the series sort of ends with him getting these other two people transferred away so that they can't impact his like power and legitimacy in the cartel. So yeah, overall, I think this series was pretty good. I quite liked it. But there's not really much more that I can say. I mean, between Narcos and Narcos Mexico, there's been 6 seasons as a whole, and I'll be honest, I'm sort of running out of things to talk about. Because as I said, it's a very consistent show, and all the seasons sort of maintain that same level of quality and same main sort of storytelling style. But yeah, like ultimately, I would highly recommend this series. If you haven't checked it out already, I would recommend you watch the first Narcos first and then watch Narcos Mexico second, because there are a few bits that do sort of tie into the original Narcos, particularly in this season. This season, I think it sort of begins around the time where Narcos season 2 is taking place. And then partway through this series, we have like the time where Pablo Escobar gets killed. And then following that, there's a few little tie-ins with season 3 of Narcos, with Amado talking to the Cali cartel. But yeah, overall, I highly recommend this series. It is really good. And yeah, I guess this is it for my coverage of the series. I have now reviewed all the seasons, which means I will need to move on to a new TV show. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you found this review helpful, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.